Continuing with these six Goswamis. Rupa, Sanatan, and Raghunath Das Goswamis we discussed so far. And that just leaves Jiva Goswami, Gopal Bhatta Goswami, and Raghunath Bhatta Goswami in that order. Jiva Goswami, otherworldly personality as the other Goswamis, but Jiva Goswami in particular is from the early days of my Krishna consciousness, was one of my heroes, or look up to as a admired personality. And there's a lot to say about Jiva Goswami. He was the most prolific. I just list some of the categories of his contributions. More than 400,000 verses. One of our ISKCON leaders uses the figure of 550,000 verses in Sanskrit. Whatever the number is, he's the most prolific. He wrote more writings than the other Goswamis combined. And very dense, very heavy, very weighty, very important literatures. So his writing of literatures was most significant. He had the vision to preserve the writings of the Goswamis. Very important contribution for the furtherance of the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, but the others didn't have the same acumen he did. He specifically received a generous gift from Emperor Akbar to create a library for the Goswami literature. Emperor Akbar visited Vrindavan. Specifically, amongst the Mughal leaders, one who had broad vision and particularly had appreciation for the Goswamis and was very significant in helping to establish Gaudiya Vaishnavism in Vrindavan during his rule. By Jiva Goswami's, he paid a visit in the year 1570. You can see the dates of his life. In the year 1570, Emperor Akbar personally came all the way from Delhi, and there wasn't a highway. He came all the way from Delhi to visit Vrindavan and interact with the Goswamis. He interacted specifically with Jiva Goswami and was so moved. Now there's different accounts, but he gave permission. Some accounts say he gave funds for the building of 4 temples, major temples in Vrindavan. Madan Mohan, Radha Govindaji, the Gopinath temple, and Yugal Kishore. Does anybody here know anything about the Yugal Kishore deities? Maybe you can ask Yugal Kishore if he knows anything about the Yugal Kishore deities. But those 4 are mentioned, consistently. And we mentioned that with Sanatana Goswami, when he gave that permission, and it was When he gave that permission, it was specifically as a result of his association with Jiva Goswami. He was very, not just impressed, he was moved, spiritually moved by association with Jiva Goswami during his visit. Jiva Goswami personally built oversaw the building, made the design, oversaw the construction of the Radha Damodar temple, one of the classic special temples in all of Vrindavan. He trained the next generation. This is critical, because after, commonly, just like in ISKCON, there's a similar dynamic, but after a great personality like Jiva Goswami, like Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, after Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's life, what would continue that which Chaitanya Mahaprabhu established? Well, Rupa and Sanatan, but then Rupa and Sanatan had the good fortune of having their nephew, Jiva Goswami, become the next Acharya, and Jiva Goswami ensured that the next Acharyas following him were trained and dispatched. So that's another, the first book distribution party, traveling Sankirtan party, was Jiva Goswami's, by his arrangement. He made arrangements with Akbar. He had the foresight which, people that are very scholarly are not known for, of making practical arrangements with property and securing deeds on property, because, it wasn't needed, it wasn't done, but he did it. He has the names of the deities inscribed like deeds for the property of the Goswamis. He personally, there's literatures verifying all of this, he personally made a will, and then made a second will to make sure that the intellectual property that was the library, his deities, and even in the will named the pujari that would take care of the deities in his absence, so there would be no squabble. Sometimes there's squabbles after someone has property and it's not clear what they wanted, so he did it twice. He helped oversee the Radhakund excavation. We heard that the size of the Radhakund was quite small. The histories say between 6 and 8 meters wide. That's not its dimension now. So he oversaw it being constructed properly. Raghunath Das was on the ground, but Jiva Goswami was the plan maker. He's known amongst the Goswamis especially to have the vision to see to the propagation of the teachings of Lord Chaitanya throughout the land. Now, it's not that the others didn't involve themselves, but he was the primary person. There was a little ceremony after the departure from this world of Rupa Goswami. He arranged for the samadhi of Rupa Goswami to be in the courtyard of the Radha Damodar temple, and shortly after that festival of the samadhi of Rupa Goswami, the Gopal Bhatta, the others who were present at the time, got together and specifically had a formal acknowledgement that you are the successor of Rupa Goswami. He was the leader. He was the visionary. He was the literary person. He was the protector. He was such an important person. Now, the major acquaintance that we have is of his writings. For example, here's one little example. He wrote 25 known books. One of them was a commentary on Brahma Samhita. Now, you know the story. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in his South Indian travels at the Adikeshava temple, he heard the recitation of Brahma Samhita. He appreciated immediately, he had a copy made. He took a copy with him. When he went through, on his way back to Puri, he gave a copy to Ramananda Roy. When he got back to Puri, he gave a copy to others. So, Brahma Samhita is an authorized book by Lord Chaitanya. So what did Jiva Goswami do? He wrote a commentary. That commentary was in Sanskrit. That Sanskrit commentary was rewritten in Bengali by Bhaktivinoda and rewritten in Sanskrit, in English, by Bhaktisiddhanta, which is what we have. But Jiva Goswami was the origin of commentary. And that commentary has been translated into English. And it's the minuteness of his going into details about things, everything he wrote was very, very detailed, very precise, very authoritative, compelling. We'll hear about something. I'm having a nice time just speaking about Jiva Goswami. After he left home, we'll hear about that, he went to Benares under Nityananda's recommendation to study under Madhusudana Vachaspati, who was a disciple of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, living of all places in Benares. Benares is known as the seat of Mayavadis. He's known for that. The place is known for that. He stayed there for around 10 years, studying, and by the time he was 20, he was already a celebrity because of his erudition, with making references at that time, just 20, with references to Ramanujacharya, Madhvacharya, this Acharya, that Acharya, their writings, their teachings. He just had an insatiable appetite for receiving and understanding and giving. To this day, at Benares University, which is a puffy-wuffy school, it's a well-known Sanskrit school, there's a whole department that's just for the study of Jiva Goswami's writings. To this day. He's, in our Gaudiya tradition, we honor him as the most learned person. There's others outside of the Gaudiya tradition that similarly honor him. There's never been a scholar like him in the whole of history of the world, from the view of many people. So let's go to his upbringing. You see the date of his birth. It's uncertain in his biography whether he met Lord Chaitanya or not. Some say when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu first came to Ramakeli, he was a little child. Some biographers say it's unknown. But he was the child of Anupam and his two uncles, Rupa and Sanatan. He knew of Lord Chaitanya through them. And in his childhood, naturally, very, very scholarly, and very devotional. He had an affinity, even as a small child, for deities. Now, this is not the deities that he had. This is just Krishna Balaram deities off the internet. But he had Krishna Balaram deities that he spent his whole day after day after day, making clothes for them, decorating them, cooking for them, not just his mother cooking for them, but he would cook for them, make offerings to them, take the prasad from his deities, distribute the prasad to his friends. he was very attached to Krishna Balaram. It is said he even went to bed with his deities at his chest. And his mother tried to take the deities away from him because you don't take deities to bed with you, but he was too attached. It is said that this attachment that he had for Krishna Balaram resulted in a dream where Krishna Balaram, his deities, appeared in his dream, and then before his eyes they transformed into Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda, and then transformed back to Krishna Balaram, a child. And when his two uncles went to Vrindavan under the order of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he also desired that. But it was around when he was 10 years old that he received news that his father had died. Remember, his father died in the trip from with Rupa Goswami. After spending 1 month in Vrindavan, they traveled back to visit Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in Puri along the bank of the Ganges. During that journey, he died, doesn't say of what. And news went to Jiva Goswami, who was devastated, deeply distressed. And there are varying reports of what was the circumstance with his mother. One of those reports, it seems a little more consistent than the other ones, she didn't want her son to travel alone. He was very young. And she was cautious, like mothers might be, that he might just go the path of renunciation. And so he convinced her that he could get in a boat and go to the family of their ancestors. Shh. The family of their ancestors of Faridabad, but the boatman, he had the boatman and said, take him to Navadvip. And when he got to Navadvip, Lord Nityananda, the transcendentally omniscient Lord Nityananda, knew he was coming, so he went to the home of Srivas Pandit, and Lord Nityananda was waiting for him. And there's this nice saying, when he got to Srivas's home, Nityananda received him and said, oh, you're the nephew of Rupa and Sanatan? And immediately treated him like family with great affection. And very kindly, because it was Jiva Goswami's desire, he fulfilled his desire by taking him to the places of Lord Chaitanya's pastimes, a celebrated event which is written in Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Navadvip Parikrama book, Navadvip Dham Parikrama. And he took him to all those places, a very ecstatic visit. And there's this Adbhuta Mandir that's in this painting, shows up as the TOVP in this painting. It's mentioned specifically in Bhaktivinoda Thakur's writings that from the Ananta Samhita, this Adbhuta Mandir is described. And Jiva Goswami wanted, because during this childhood period, Lord Chaitanya was still alive, still in Puri, and he was very much eager to get Lord Chaitanya's association. So he requested Nityananda his blessings to go see and be with Lord Chaitanya in Puri. In this case, Nityananda gave a different instruction. He said that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu wants you to go to Vrindavan and assist his uncles. And so that's what he did. He has given Braja as their home or their place. And he also gave an instruction before you go there, first go to Benares and study under Madhusudana Vachaspati, from whom a detail is, Madhusudana Vachaspati not only was a Vaishnav scholar, but he was an erudite scholar in many areas. Before this, I learned from Radhika Raman. Some of you know Radhika Raman. Madhusudana Vachaspati trained him in the Six Darshans. Six Darshans means those who have studied the Vedas and have a non-theistic view about what the Vedas say. Like, for example, Karma Mimamsa. We know Karma Mimamsa very well because Krishna spoke it to to Nanda Maharaj in the Govardhan Leela. So, even before he went to stay with Rupa and Sanatan, he was trained in what all the opposing views were, and their logic, and their rhetoric, and their stances, and their positions on A to Z, and the refutation of them, before he even reached Vrindavan, under Madhusudana Vachaspati. So a good teacher prepared him very well. And as we heard already, teachings from Ramanujacharya and Vajracharya, etc. He learned all these things. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu departed this world while he was still studying in Benares. Here's a painting of Benares. He stayed there for 10 years. It is said this Sarva Sambhadani is the name of Jiva Goswami's commentary on the Sandarbhas. So he was already composing the Sandarbhas, or at least structures of it, in commentary, because the Sandarbhas, his magnus opus, his greatest contribution, was a systematic exposition on the Srimad Bhagavatam topic by topic. So he was famous before he even left Benares. When he reached Vrindavan, he had a strong urge to reach Vrindavan, and he remembered the words of Nityananda, and so he went, and he was received by all the great Vaishnavas at the time. That the biographies give a long list, and they all were there to receive him and welcomed him very graciously, because he was already a celebrated person at 20. They also, Rupa and Sanatan, took him on Parikrama of Braja, so he's getting acquainted with the pastimes of Krishna in Vrindavan, the pastime of Lord Chaitanya and Navadvip. He's getting a thorough exposure to the teachings and the Dham and the pastimes of the Lord, and even those in opposition to the Lord. He engaged in menial service to both Rupa and Sanatan. There are several biographers of Jiva Goswami's life say he first requested shelter of Sanatan Goswami, who deferred to Rupa Goswami. Some don't say that specifically, but Rupa Goswami didn't immediately accept him. He wanted to examine him, which is proper. And so he engaged him in menial activities to see what he was made of. Was he inclined to be in a servant mood, because he's already a celebrated scholar. So cleaning their utensils, and one of the big ones was preparing plantain leaves or leaves for writing, because Rupa was engaged in writing, and cleaning and little simple services. And seeing that submissive character and humble service mood of Jiva Goswami, he gave him Diksha, who was the only disciple of Rupa Goswami. We often hear that Narottam Das Thakur had only one disciple, but Rupa Goswami had only one disciple also. and that was Jiva Goswami. There are some celebrated events that took place as Jiva Goswami in his role as a disciple. During Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's life, there was interaction with Vallabhacharya, as you know. Later, Vallabhacharya, because he had sitting places in many places in Vrindavan. He liked Vrindavan very much. And so there was interaction between Vallabha and Rupa Goswami. And in one celebrated occasion, Rupa Goswami asked him, please review Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu and see if you find something that needs some modification, like editing. So he was honored, and Vallabhacharya was celebrated and is a celebrated acharya on Krishna Lila. So he accepted graciously, and he came across one particular point that he brought to Rupa Goswami's attention that he thought was not appropriate. And that's the inappropriate detail was that Rupa had written in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu was that these three, bhukti, mukti, spriha yavat, pishachi, literally means a ghost. Bhukti mukti spriha yavat pishachi hridi vartate. The translation reads, the material desire to enjoy the material world and the desire to become liberated from material bondage are considered to be two witches, and they haunt one like ghosts. As long as these witches remain within the heart, how can one feel transcendental bliss? As long as these two witches remain in the heart, there's no possibility of enjoying transcendental bliss and devotional service. Now that's the translation. And he didn't think that word witches was good. And he mentioned it to Rupa Goswami. And Rupa Goswami said, let me consider. So after that discussion, the way the narration goes, but it was time for Vallabhacharya to take his midday bath. So Jiva Goswami accompanied him in a servant role. And on the way, he took exception to Vallabhacharya's not liking the word pisachi. And he gave reference after reference after reference after reference, indicating why it was just the right word. And Vallabha was impressed. And when Vallabha came again to be with Rupa Goswami, he mentioned, your disciple, Jiva, he's very sharp. And, I made some comment about this word pishachi, but he has impressed me with his scholarship, and it's actually the right word. And Rupa Goswami waited for the right time and circumstance, but he scolded him, admonished him. I've asked Vallabhacharya for some service, and he kindly accepted some service, and you're trying to correct him. This is impertinent. This isn't right. It's one of the duties. Prabhupada would repeat like this. It's one of the duties of a spiritual master to chastise, and Rupa Goswami was chastising Jiva Goswami, because persons that are very learned, there's a tendency, not to say that Jiva Goswami was subject to this tendency, but there's a tendency to become proud of one's learning, like proud of one's wealth or proud of any opulence. There's a tendency to be proud, and he was kindly checking, admonishing, don't be proud. There was another circumstance where a similar Digvijay scholar came and was traveling around to different holy places with a following and challenging the greatest scholars and trying to defeat the scholars. And he in that mood, came to Rupa Goswami hearing that he's the greatest scholar in Vrindavan. So he offered to engage in debate. And Rupa Goswami declined. Oh, you're such a scholar. There's no scope for debate here. You consider that you've defeated me. Because he didn't want to engage in wrangling like that. So the Digvijay scholar said, very well, you put in writing that I've been defeated. Oh yes, I've been defeated. And that came to the attention of Jiva Goswami, who took exception. How is it possible? So he engaged in debate with the Digvijay scholar, and the Digvijay scholar left humiliated. This young fellow, not boy, but young man, defeated me in debate. But his guru accepted defeat by me. When that came to to Rupa Goswami's attention, he again admonished him and said, this is not, we don't do this. This is not Vaishnava behavior. We don't engage in mundane arguments with mundane people. We don't do that. In fact, this quality that you have tells me you're not fit to stay in Vrindavan. You should leave Vrindavan. And Jiva Goswami, being very attached to Rupa Goswami, was devastated. And so he left the area where Rupa Goswami was, but he couldn't exactly leave Vrindavan, so he went along the bank of the Jamuna, as you see the photograph here, a celebrated thing that happened by Nandagat near Mathura. He found a hole in the bank of the side of the Jamuna River, and he was living in the hole, a crocodile hole. I don't think there was a crocodile inside. This shows a crocodile inside. He wasn't a roommate with a crocodile. And the residents of Mathura came to know that there's a sadhu. They didn't know who he was, but he's living in this crocodile hole. And for food, he would just take the mud from the side of the Jamuna River, mix it with water, and that was what he would eat. And of course, he became sick. And this went on for quite some time. And in the course of Sanatana Goswami's doing his Madhukari and visiting the homes of people, he came to know of one sadhu. So he was concerned. He went, and sure enough, it was Jiva Goswami. And then how the story concludes, there's different versions. The version I like is he brought Jiva Goswami nearby Rupa Goswami's Bhajan Kutir and engaged in some discussion with him on teachings. What's the teaching of Lord Chaitanya about this? What's the teaching of Lord Chaitanya about that? Rupa Goswami answered him. He said, what's the greatest quality of a Vaishnava? What did Lord Chaitanya teach us? Jiva Daya. Okay, here's one Jiva. Give your Daya. Please accept him. He's learned his lesson. And so it got nicely resolved. But from his position, Jiva Goswami was defending the honor of his guru. It wasn't a transgression of etiquette, but Rupa Goswami was admonishing him, which is perfectly within the right of guru. In fact, Prabhupada's words, it's a duty. There's a nice, maybe some of you have read, I just finished reading from cover to cover, Giriraj Maharaj's wonderful book on I'll Build You a Temple, the Juhu story. And there's some question there. It's Navayogendra Swami asking Prabhupada how to take it when the spiritual master chastises the disciple. He said, it's kindness. Take it as kindness. Because supposing someone doesn't have a protector, then one may engage in all kinds of unguided activities that when you're getting admonished or corrected, it's mercy. Take it that way. because otherwise you're anatha. You have no master. When you have master, then you stand to be corrected. So that's what my understanding, at least, what Rupa Goswami was doing. He was establishing strongly the role of guru before a very, very most eminently qualified disciple, but maintaining that relationship. So time went on. Rupa Goswami would give manuscripts to Jiva Goswami to proofread, and along with proofreading, he ended up making commentaries. We'll see the list of his books. Sanatana Goswami followed suit. He gave, because he had a capacity to read and understand, and we don't know what comments he made, editorial comments, but he made commentaries on Sanatana Goswami's 10th canto, commentary on the Bhagavatam. He made a commentary on Sanatana Goswami's commentary. He made a commentary on Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. He made a commentary on Ujjvala Lilamani. He made a commentary on everything that was given to him to proofread, because that's just his nature. He could understand and expand the meaning of in so many ways. Amazing personality. And so here's this other contribution, his training, as it's well known. Along with all of that, he had a little school. And in his little school, it was 3 students. And those 3 students were Shyamananda, Narottam Das Thakur, and Srinivasacharya, who became the next acharyas in the line of disciplic succession. Very significant contribution. Here's a sample of his handwriting. Here's a list of 25 of his well-known books, found directly in Bhakti Ratnakar. This Harinamrita Vyakarana, it's drawn from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. When Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was a student, was a teacher of grammar, after he took initiation from Ishwarapuri, he then began teaching grammar using names of Krishna, right? All the rules of grammar, there's a zillion rules, and he gave assigned names of Krishna to those rules. Jiva Goswami wrote a book following Lord Chaitanya's teaching Sanskrit grammar using names of Krishna. Prabhupada's comment is, one who studies, and this was taught, I don't know what is being done today, but it was taught years ago in the Vrindavan Gurukul, exactly Jiva Goswami's writings to teach the kids Sanskrit. But they would not just learn Sanskrit rules, it has its magic, Prabhupada's words, it has a magical way of helping the student in Sanskrit to become devotee of Krishna. Gopalchampu is a retelling of Krishna's pastimes in a prose form primarily, but it's in 2 parts, Krishna in Vrindavan, Krishna outside Vrindavan. Sounds familiar, right? Like Rupa Goswami's writing, only it's different. And it's a retelling of that whole story. It's really amazing, really amazing. Krama Sundarba, this number 3 in the list, is like Prabhupada's commentary. It's a verse-by-verse kind of commentary on the whole 12 cantos. Now, unlike what Prabhupada did in Jiva Goswami's case, he wouldn't always give comments on verses, but he would give comments on a number of verses. A number of those comments from Krama Sundarba find their way into the Sundarbas, or he's just taking from the Sundarbas. The Sundarbas are 6 in number. As you see, the commentary, Sarva Samvadani, he began compiling even when he was in Benares. So he wrote the Sundarbas and the commentary on the Sundarbas. And it follows, without a long exposition, there are texts that can tell you. Prabhupada's books explain what's in these 6 Sundarbas, but Sambandha Abhideya Prayojana, starting with initial Tattva Sundarba or Pramana Kanda. It's a really good, it's short, and at some point in time, Krishna willing, I've been asked to write a book that explains Tattva Sundarba, because Gopi Pranadhana's translation of Jiva Goswami's writings is for scholars, and it makes it a little like chewing sawdust or something for most devotees. It's a little hard. And so to make it, something that's accessible for devotees, to an exposition, but it's very valuable to learn the Pramanakanda section, the other section too, but of Tattva Sandarbha. But why Srimad Bhagavatam is given its importance as the Pramanakanda, the primary means of knowing anything, what to speak of transcendence, what to speak of Krishna. It's all there, real tight, for scholars, without saying more. Then he doesn't go to, he writes that I don't need to write Brahman Sandarbha because Shankaracharya has already done a good job. So he goes to Paramatma Sandarbha, then Bhagavat Sandarbha, then Krishna Sandarbha. The sequence is not right here. Paramatma Sandarbha, Bhagavat Sandarbha, Krishna Sandarbha. And that's the Sambandha Gyan. Then the Prayojana, Abhideya, Bhakti Sandarbha is the biggest of the Sandarbhas. Very weighty. Like, devotees like the Anartha Vritti topic. Read Bhakti Sandarbha and hold on to your socks, because it's so detailed, so brilliant to understand how anarthas arise and how they're overcome, and the nature of them, the varieties, the stages of unfolding of anarthas, and the stages of withdrawing anarthas. It's really amazing, very scholarly. And Priti Sandarbha. He likes Priti as we commonly use Prema. It's so similar. Radha Krishnarchana Deepika, a very important writing for Gaudiya followers. He describes the method of worshipping Radha and Krishna together. Very detailed. Madhava Mahotsav is kind of like a novel. It's short, but it's Radha has an experience of Man when Krishna's late for a meeting, and she goes off and becomes disturbed, and Krishna becomes disturbed. Purnamasi goes to find her. There she is in a cabin beside herself with, why do I get like this? I know who Krishna is, but he's everything for me. So Purnamasi hears her speaking like this to herself, like a mad woman. And she tells Radha, you have to come back. Krishna may leave his body. He's in such a state because of your leaving. So she comes back, and Krishna decides to make her queen of Vrindavan. So it's Radha Mahotsav, but it's Madhav Mahotsav. It's Krishna's glories. It's called Madhav Mahotsav. But the second half of the writing is the festival where Radha becomes queen of Vrindavan. Big festival. That's really nice. Gopalchampu is one of the Upanishads. He wrote a commentary on Gopalchampu. Brahma Samhita, he wrote a commentary on Brahma Samhita. Rasamrita, he wrote a commentary on Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Commentary on Ujjvala Nilamani. And I don't know what all these other ones are, the ones at the end. He wrote a commentary on Agni Purana Gayatri Bhasya in Agni Purana, because some people take it that the Gayatri mantra is worship of the sun, And so in Agni Purana, he explains its worship of Krishna. He gives a whole book that's describing the lotus feet of Krishna, the lotus feet of Radharani, and major contributions. Major contributions. There's a nice description that says one time Rupa Goswami, the worshipper of Govindaji, had a dream in which Govindaji appeared in a form showing his form of Damodar and instructed him in his dream to carefully, personally carve a deity for his disciple Jiva Goswami, study the features that you see here and make a deity exactly like this, because I want to be worshipped by Jiva Goswami. So Rupa Goswami did that. Rupa Goswami had many talents, including how to make deities. And Rupa Goswami personally composed a pranam mantra for Damodar, which is found in his writings in Stavamala. O Lord Damodar, whose dark bodily luster embarrasses the blue lotus flowers, the splendor of whose silken garments stuns the glory of yellow kunkum, who enjoys transcendental pastimes in Vrindavan forest, whose chest is fragrant with brilliant flower garland, and whose magnificent arm rests on Radha's shoulders, let us meditate. Stavamala is one of Rupa Goswami's writings, and this pranamantra for Damodar is found there. The deity that he carved is about 8 inches tall. The deity ended up in Jaipur, like many of the deities of the Goswamis. And it is said that the deity was carved from black marble from Vindhya Parvat mountain, South India. And there's a close-up of the deity, Damodar. Here's another photo. It's hard to get good photos because the deed is kind of small. When he received the deities from Rupa Goswami, there was no temple. The Goswamis, Vrindavan was a jungle. And so he lived in Sevakunj. This is a photograph of what Sevakunj looks like today. Gnarled trees, etc., etc. And that's where he stayed, and that's where he worshipped Damodar. After some time, Jiva Goswami purchased a tract of land from one of the Chaduris. Again, remember the Chaduri post? That Raghunath Das Goswami negotiated a settlement with Chaduri, so that the Akbar also had one of his Chaduris. He made an arrangement to purchase land in Sevakunj that then stretched all the way from Imli Tal. Those of you who have been in Vrindavan, you know where Imli Tal is, and the Rasastali area of Nidhivan, and all the way up to where the Radha Damodar temple is today. And the Sevakunj area was that big area. And then he built temples, built his Radha Damodar temple. It's said, going back to his childhood where he had intimate dealings with Krishna Balaram, he had intimate dealings with his Damodar deity because Damodar wanted to be worshipped by him. And so some examples that are commonly narrated, sometimes the deity would indicate to Jiva Goswami what he would like him to offer as cooked items. Jiva Goswami would cook it, he'd offer to the deity, and he'd sit there and watch Damodar eat. Sometimes Jiva Goswami would recite or sing, and Damodar would dance. Very intimate. So, that one occasion it is said that Damodar called him from some distance and told him he wanted him to hear his flute playing. Jiva Goswami came, and Damodar was engaged in flute playing. And when he heard Krishna's flute playing, he fainted. And when he regained consciousness, he composed some prayers to Damodar. This is Jiva Goswami and his deity worship. O Hari, all glories to your childhood pastimes which you enjoy with Balaram. You give happiness to Mother Yashoda with your crawling. And the sight of you blesses the eyes of every last person in Vrindavan. O child, the eager movements of your feet stir your ankles to make tinkling sounds that delight the hearts of all. O Krishna, when even you meet strangers, you share your bliss with them and then quickly crawl back onto the safety of your mother's lap. And these are found in Gopalchampu, but it's said that these particular verses were Jiva Goswami's verses glorifying Radha Damodar, or Damodar at that time. Radha came later. Very intimate with his deities. Very amazing. And with dignitaries. Emperor Akbar once invited Jiva Goswami to come to his court because among scholars, Akbar had a disposition where he was learned and very spiritual and spiritually inclined. So because he was ruling in an area where the Jamuna flowed, and there was some discussion among scholars of which is greater, Ganga or Jamuna, he wanted Jiva Goswami to come and participate. So Jiva Goswami did something like what Bhaktisiddhanta did. He glorified Ganga, and then he superlatively glorified Jamuna, saying, Ganga, this was like the clincher, Ganga washed the feet of Lord Vishnu, but the Jamuna was receiving the full body bath of Lord Krishna time and again. So Ganga is greater. And Akbar accepted the conclusion of Jiva Goswami. He wanted to give him a gift, some dakshin, and Jiva Goswami asked him for some writing paper. Because during the time there wasn't writing paper. But in the royal assembly, they had special writing paper from China. And so he wanted some of that for his writing. Akbar was happy to give. He donated funds, Akbar, that through he was moved by the Goswamis and particularly by Jiva Goswami. When Jiva Goswami took up creating a library, Akbar, donated funds because he had great appreciation for the Goswamis to establish a library. So not only the building, but persons to make copies, because you make hand copies. So many, many Brahmins were engaged in making copies of Goswami literature. Very important work. After some time, Janava, the wife of Nityananda, communicated with Jiva Goswami that while things are flourishing like anything in Vrindavan, over here on the eastern side of India, where Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also spent time, in Bengal and Orissa, there isn't the same kind of vitality of the teachings of Lord Chaitanya continuing on. So can you make an arrangement that the literatures of the Goswamis that have been produced in Vrindavan, copies can be brought over here and translated into local languages and we can distribute them widely? So that was a piece of cake for him. He arranged, as we know very well, this bullock cart or carts with literatures of the Goswamis packed on the back of the carts to go to the eastern parts of India. Now, there was a mishap, but it would turn into good fortune, actually. But the books were stolen, etc. But he also sent his, the 3 students to go to the eastern parts of India, because he was holding down the fort there in Vrindavan, and distribute the teachings of Lord Chaitanya widely. He was a visionary that was thinking not just his work and his local service, but the Lord Chaitanya's mission of delivering souls across the land. There's not much detail, but it's often said that Mirabai also had heard of Jiva Goswami, requested a meeting with Jiva Goswami, and he didn't decline. Prabhupada speaks about this. Sometimes it is said that, sannyasis, Gaudiya sannyasis should never meet with women, but he refers to, it's said that Jiva Goswami met with Mirabai. Now, we don't know the circumstance, but he met with Mirabai. He was very instrumental in the excavation of Radhakund. We've seen this photograph before, to help Raghunath Das Goswami do it properly. It is said in many of his biographies that Rajman Singh, who was one of the, Rajman Singh, I learned this recently, he was one of the generals in Akbar's army, but he was a Rajput king. He was a king in Rajasthan. So Rajman Singh, rather than fighting Akbar, said, let's work together, and I'll help you rule in the land. So they had this relationship where he was one of his generals, but he was a Vaishnav, Rajman Singh. And so Rajman Singh helped, or personally took responsibility for building the Govindaji temple, and Rajman Singh was engaged by Jiva Goswami in building the first 8 steps on all 4 sides of Radhakund. Jiva Goswami was a very important person during a very important time when Akbar was ruling, and the kings in various places, they all looked up to him, and he was engaging them in building Vrindavan, because when they first went there, it was just jungle and agricultural land. It's said that Jiva Goswami's memory is not only his intellect, but his memory. I mentioned this. But he would compose things in his mind and just write them down. When you have leaf paper or regular paper, there's no, you don't, how do you edit? You write, when I write something, I have to rewrite it several times to get, so it's close to what I want to say. But Jiva Goswami didn't have to do that. He just wrote it once. Perfect. Rupa Goswami entrusted all of his writings to Jiva Goswami, which then made it into this library. And at the end of Rupa Goswami's life, Jiva Goswami placed his body in samadhi in the courtyard of his temple, the Radha Damodar temple. Here's, in that other side of the Radha Damodar temple, is, as you see here, his samadhi, his bhajan kutir as well. And when you visit the Radha Damodar temple, they may, if you're fortunate, they'll show you his japa beads. Here's a photo of his personal japa beads. Here's the courtyard, as you see in the lower portion of this photo. Daily there's Bhagavad Gita reading in the courtyard. Up the steps, that's where the temple is. The deities are. Regularly, the Goswamis would come together and discuss the strategies for disseminating Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's message, as well as discussing Krishna Katha. The first time I visited Radha Damodar temple, visited Vrindavan, included a visit to Radha Damodar temple, was I think 1974. And it was right after the Kartik year that Prabhupada took many disciples to Vrindavan and took them around the places of Vrindavan. And the person who took us around Vrindavan was Guru Das, because he was there with Prabhupada during that celebrated Prabhupada taking devotees to places in Vrindavan. So I remember very clearly. Today, what existed then doesn't exist. But commonly, the pilgrims will circumambulate around the deity and go back around Prabhupada, Rupa Goswami Samadhi and Bhugarba Goswami Samadhi way over in the corner and come back around the other side and like that. Pilgrims will do that parikrama around the Radha Damodar altar 3 times, commonly. When we went, when you go on the back side of the temple, there was like a platform. And the platform had underneath it kind of like a basement, or like, a dug-in area. And we were told, this is my memory, Guru Das told us, when the summer in Vrindavan became very, very hot, it's like unbearable, so this was a place that was cool. It was in the back side of the altar, and down below with a covering, so the Goswamis would go down there where it was cool, and that's where they would have their Krishna Katha sessions and planning and strategizing. So that's not there now. Lots of things have changed there over time. But it was geographically kind of central. Gopal Bhatta's over here, and Rupa Goswami's over there, and Sanatana Goswami's over there, and his place was central. And he was Jiva Goswami. So they met there. It's very important, such activities. Here's a photograph of the altar. You see a lot of Radha Krishna deities. And if you see in the front, there's that little wooden table. On top of the little wooden table is the Govardhan Shila that Krishna placed his foot on for Sanatana Goswami to circumambulate. Quite large Shila. And we'll introduce you to the many deities on the altar. We'll start from our vision from the left, or the deity's right side. Radha Vrindavan Chandra of Krishnadas Kaviraj is on the far left. Quite large deity, isn't it? Radha Vrindavan Chandra of Krishnadas Kaviraj. And then next to them is Radha Damodar, the large deity in the center here. And to Damodar's right, or to our left, that's Lalita. And next to them, the little shorter deity is Radha Madhava, Jayadev Goswami's Radha Madhava. You can see better here, Radha Madhava. And then, very interesting name for deities, Bhugarba Goswami's Radha Chanchi Kaniya, Chalchi Kaniya. You can see a little bit better over here too, Chalchi Kaniya. So there's the altar on a different day, the Govardhan Shila in the front and that little table. And here's a close-up of the deities on the altar of Damodar. It's a detail, but the local devotees at this temple claim that the deity of Jiva Goswami was taken to Jaipur but was brought back, and this is Jiva Goswami's deity. But the Jiva Goswami deity is commonly understood to be 8 inches tall, and this deity is not 8 inches tall. Anyway, there's some differences of opinion sometimes. Here's the deity of Radha Damodar at Chandan Yatra. Here's the deity of Radha Damodar at Radha Kund. Here's a close-up of the deity. And if you notice on the upper left, there's Jiva Goswami, who was formerly Vilas Manjari Gopi, is on the altar at Radha Kund. That's how they worship her. Here's a prayer. Now, this is compliments of Hari Parshad Prabhu, who likes poetic expressions and is very familiar with writings of previous acharyas. A 19th century poet wrote about Jiva Goswami. To the peerless lotus feet of Srila Jiva Goswami, I offer constant obeisances. He is a desire-fulfilling tree who possesses a mind full of compassion and is a true friend of the fallen and distressed. Always considering himself to be a bee-like servant of the lotus feet of Sri Rupa Goswami and Sri Sanatan Goswami, he contributed many conclusions in his books to spread the glories and fame of Lord Krishna far and wide. Here's a statement by Baladev Vidyabhusan. By the mighty spade of his nectarian words, Jiva Goswami tossed aside the dirt of the fallacious Sankhya arguments and recovered Krishna's splendor from the pit of Vivartavad. May he be our refuge. And from Bhakti Ratnakar, it's drawn from Narayana Bhatta Goswami. Narayana Bhatta Goswami was a contemporary of the six Goswamis. He hailed from South India, and as a young man, he had a calling to go to Vrindavan, where he resided for the first part of his life in Vrindavan by Radhakund. Later he went to Unchagaon. That's where he spent a good part of his time. He wrote a book describing something like 355 places of Krishna's pastimes in Vrindavan, with pranam mantras for each place. Anyway, it's recited in Bhakti Ratnakar, Narayan Bhatta Goswami. I offer my repeated humble obeisances unto Srila Jiva Goswami, whose heart is constantly attracted to the lotus feet of Srila Rupa Goswami. He is the crest jewel of all Vaishnavas, and due to his causeless mercy, he bestows unimaginable joy to even the non-philosophical, dull-headed, and lazy people by his deep philosophical views. And that's the last slide. The impact of Jiva Goswami's life is amazing. And following Jiva Goswami's life, of course, the three principal disciples, they had significant impact. But following their lives, it was less dramatic. There was somewhat of a decline of the prominence, as it had been during the time of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Rupa and Sanatan, Jiva Goswami, and the three. But he maintained the tidal wave of profound Krishna bhakti through his writings and his presence and his influence upon others and so forth, and creating the next generation, preserving literature, sending literature. It was a great time for Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's following, and he had a big important role in it. So we're honoring Jiva Goswami. And why are we honoring Jiva Goswami? Why are we doing this step back? Why are we doing this exercise? The stories of these personalities' lives is charming and invigorating, and it churns something in the heart. It churns the bhakti, our own bhakti life, just hearing. Now, how to keep that in your heart is by appreciating these personalities, what the gifts were that they had to give. Again, this gratitude message we spoke about earlier today. And then want to do some service for them. Say it negatively. Without the idea of trying to do some service to them, it will sag, or it'll fade, or the enthusiasm, the joy, the appreciation, the regard that one has for them will be filled with distractions of so many other things. That's what will happen. Very natural. We're conditioned souls, and we're distracted. So the mood of service to these great personalities is very important. And even if the next step is a small next step, what's the next step? Tomorrow, I've been a little concerned. The classes are, you notice, they're getting shorter. The first class was like really long, maybe too long. But an important function is to integrate all of this. So tomorrow there's a plan at 10:30, I believe the schedule, for breakout sessions. And it's the purpose, the function, is taking all this and bringing it inside and doing it collectively with others. It's a very important phase of the spiritual growth process, or the process of hearing, is integrating what you've heard. So although I've been exercising you maybe too much in a short period of time, far more than what you're accustomed to, my apology for that, but that's what we're doing. But I'm encouraging as much as you can. Participate in the breakout sessions, because it's the integration exercise. Bring it inside, and consider ways that it can stay inside and be in service to these personalities and the lessons that they taught, the example that they set. The door to Radha Krishna's eternal pastimes is open. They're the door, and they're inviting us. And we're gesturing in their direction. There's the door. So consider like that. Even if you don't come to the breakout sessions, consider like that. How to take this understanding to a practical level where it stays inside and it grows. Something like the discussions we had in the morning, that these persons are maybe abstract personalities, like storybookish kind of things, but how to make them, bring them, come to the point where it's relevant and they're meaningful and they're persons who you actually call out to. And when you call out with that kind of sincerity, they're ready. They're ready. They're ready to bestow everything that they have upon the ready recipient. Like that reference this morning, the Bhaktisiddhanta said, the Goswamis, they're ready to make themselves personally visible today, if we're just qualified and eager. So how to get there? So this is part of what we're doing. A major part is just hearing about them, remembering them, and these visual images, paintings of them and so forth, their places. It's all part of stimulating our sense of attraction for them. And it's Lord Chaitanya's arrangement to help us get closer to that position where we're in Vraja, eternally, or life after life, as Bhaktivinoda Thakur writes. They're the doorway. So how to take it to the next level? At least a step in that direction. So let's see if there's some discussion.
Very inspiring to hear about the whole personality of Jiva Goswami. I have two questions, Maharaj. One is, if I want to hear more about him, where can I read, Maharaj, about him?
Satyaraj wrote a book, and he did a fair amount of research in preparing the book. Now, his readership, by his own, his target audience was scholars. So in his writing, there's things that are attractive to devotees, and there's things that are attractive to scholars that aren't as attractive to devotees. But there's a source. What he writes about Jiva Goswami and the other Goswamis, the 6 Goswamis. I think that's the title of the book. It's a source. A primary source that's very authentic and doesn't have that, sand in the sweet rice, is this Gaudiya Vaishnav writer of the Lives of Lord Chaitanya. And do you like to do research?
Okay, Maharaj. I like to read, Maharaj.
You like to read?
Yes.
Well, there's a book that's, I'm pretty sure it's available online. I have it in my computer, digital version. But it's Tirtha Maharaj, I forget the first part of his name. But he's written very carefully about the Goswamis, and Jiva Goswami is a long section. All the personalities connected with Lord Chaitanya. That's a very good source.
It's a book by Tirtha Maharaj?
Huh?
It's a book by Tirtha Maharaj? It's a book written by the Gaudiya Sannyasi?
The author is something Tirtha.
Okay.
I can tell you afterwards if you like.
Okay, Maharaj.
And most likely it's available online. All kinds of places online. You can just download it as a PDF and you got it.
Okay, Maharaj. And Maharaj, one more question. It came when you were mentioning about Rupa Goswami told Jiva Goswami you are not...
Speak slowly.
Rupa Goswami told Jiva Goswami that you are not fit to stay in Vrindavan, like those particular section. So this is something I experience in my heart, and I feel it's an obstacle in my spiritual life, so I want to share and seek guidance. Want to emphasize the solution for NB Maharaj. Personally I have seen, when I see someone struggling in their Krishna consciousness, it gives me a lot of pleasure. And when I see someone doing very good in their Krishna consciousness, it gives me pain. And it gives me feel like they have so much mercy and I don't have any mercy. And how do I maintain my consciousness in those situations my consciousness is pleasing to Srila Prabhupada and Lord Krishna Maharaj?
Well, Bhavo Sadat Shrotrama Ramat. Srimad Bhagavatam is the medicine that cures that disease. That's a short answer. Because prayers of Prahlad Maharaj is full of, addressing this question. But, the topics of Srimad Bhagavatam are such that it's medicine. It's medicine that is administered through the ear. But it's medicine that cures the material disease. Because what you described, it's a material disease. It's not you. It's a diseased condition of the soul. And your bhakti is there, obviously. There's a diseased condition. It's not elevated, fully healthy bhakti presently. So it cures the disease. That's in the course of preparing all of this, I've grown to appreciate uniquely. He's the last one. It's going to come on Sunday. The Sunday program is Raghunath Bhatta. He's of the 6 Goswamis, didn't have deities. They all had deities except him. His deity was Srimad Bhagavatam. And I relate, Bhagavatam is, Uma once asked me, what's your experience with deity worship? And it's Srimad Bhagavatam. For me, it's Srimad Bhagavatam. And there's some history and Prabhupada says and things like that, but it sustains my life, spiritual life. It sustains my spiritual life, Srimad Bhagavatam, and it brings about it cures the material disease. No, it's not. You can do any old thing and just take some Srimad Bhagavatam and you're fine. You have to, be a follower, a worshipper. But it cures the material disease. So who is not diseased? Who is a pure Shuddha Bhakta? Who is an eternal resident of Vrindavan, going to that one slide? We're not there. But how to get there? Cure the disease. I have a lot of faith in Srimad Bhagavatam, just hearing Srimad Bhagavatam. And I know many others that they can be going through, turned upside down and being shaken by their heels, and go read Srimad Bhagavatam. And, the heart is altogether changed. It's magical. And then the commentaries of our acharyas just add sweetness to it. So then comes this other question, when are we ready to read? So take guidance, but we take the medicine to cure our disease. Certainly the holy name and Srimad Bhagavatam. Go ahead.
Maharaj, I heard from a devotee that
You heard from a devotee?
Yeah, I'm not able to recall his name. His name Hari Parshad Prabhu.
Hari Parshad.
Yeah, he said when Jiva Goswami met Akbar, he asked for the leaves that, as you said, that paper.
He did what?
He asked for paper.
He asked for paper.
Yeah, if I can be.
Yes.
So, along with paper, he gave a lot of valuable things.
Along with paper came validation?
Valuable things, like gold and diamonds along. He sent some
I don't know
ornaments.
anything about that. Hari Parshad knows something I don't know. If you want a clarification, you have to ask him, because I don't know anything about other things. I only know about the paper.
Okay, what he said is he discarded all of them in the Yamuna and he only kept paper. I mean, I just wanted to confirm, is it there?
I have no idea. You have to ask Hari Parshad.
Okay, thanks.
I mean, Hari Parshad is very careful. He doesn't whimsically say things. But it's a little hard to get his attention, because he's a person in demand, to get, where's the source of that story come from? Okay, I believe you. But if you ask me, where's the source of this information? I never heard it before, to speak of the source. So you'd have to ask him, and I'm saying you're not likely to get his attention. But I'm also saying he doesn't make up stories. But in several biographical sources about Jiva Goswami, this meeting with Akbar is consistently mentioned, and Akbar wanting to give some dakshin, and Jiva Goswami seeing in the palace this fantastic paper. He just asked for paper because it's hard to come by. It was it was very unique and very valuable for his service. So if there were other things given that not in the paper category, I don't know about it. I never heard it before until just now.
Or did he happen to engage Akbar also in building?
Did he what?
Did Jiva Goswami engage Akbar also in building temples and other activities?
Yeah, people helped with financing the construction of temples. Yes. And to what degree was he involved? He was involved with the. Certainly, he was involved with Radha Kund excavation, and certainly he was involved with the Radha Damodar temple. There's no information of where the funds came from. I'm sure they came from somewhere, but I don't know. I haven't come across it, so I can't answer your question.
Oh, okay, Maharaj.
Someone helped him, and how it happened, I don't know. But he was involved in designing the structure of the Radha Damodar temple, and the tract of land that it was on was part of his arrangement also. So he did practical things, but there's not a lot of information about the lives of these personalities. So you kind of have to, my experience is you kind of have to be very cautious about what the source is, and then that when there are things that are consistent, then they're worthy of being repeated. That's my standard anyway.
Okay, thank you, Maharaj.
So you don't press me on things that I'm not familiar with, and I'm going to tell you I don't know.
Yeah, but what I felt is like you might not have mentioned that. I just wanted to clarify
Okay.
something.
And you're getting my answer. I don't know. Over here? Uma?
Maharaj, I just found a reference and I wanted to confirm. Is it Bhakti Vallabha Tirtha Swami?
Is it what?
Bhakti Vallabha Tirtha Swami.
Sounds right.
And Chaitanya, His Life and Associates.
Yes. And it's online.
It is on
Okay.
Amazon, yeah.
Okay.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. So I had two questions, and so I was wondering if you know what happened to the Krishna Balaram deities that Jiva Goswami used to worship.
We don't. There's no biographical information that says what happened to those deities.
Okay, Maharaj. Thank you. And then my second question is how does ISKCON view Mirabai?
She's a great Vaishnavi. There's you want to add something to that question? You have set your own question. Okay. There's kind of a blurry answer to your question. So therefore I just gave you the prominent part that's not blurry. She's a great Vaishnavi. And a contemporary of the Goswamis, and specifically a contemporary of Jiva Goswami, and she lived in Vrindavan. But it's kind of, the rest is kind of blurry. So it's hard to say something definitive about that which is blurry. Can I'd like to come up afterwards. I want to share something with you. It has to do with when you ask questions, you say about 6 times. And I went through this exercise with a younger than you girl, and she doesn't say anymore. And as you go on in your life, as a person, and certainly as a representative of Krishna as well, it detracts from what you say if you so many times. So you can fill that space with something else if you're conscious, because otherwise it just becomes a habit, an unconscious habit. And there are ways to cure it. Starts with recognizing that you're doing it. And I was debating whether to say anything, because here we are in a public space, and I'm bringing it up. Anyway, you come speak to me later. But back in the back row.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. And I'm really reflecting on your closing remark about the importance of internalizing and bringing in the teachings and inspiring lessons from the life of Srila Jiva Goswami. The struggle I've always felt in my spiritual life is when we hear about the Goswamis and we hear about their renunciation, Tyaktva Turnamasesha Mandala Patishanim Sada, and Prabhupada would always emphasize Tuchavat. They just discarded.
Gave it up.
So for most of us who are not going to be renounced enough like the Goswamis and living in caves, and we have to live here in America, I've always wondered actually, how do we bring in their teachings and inspirations? Where do we start? Because our lives look so different from theirs.
Well, I think you know the answer. I mean, doing it is another thing. But the answer is Krishna gets fixed in the center. There are Vaishnavas. Let's go to Lord Chaitanya's associates, for example, Pundrik Vidyanidhi. It wasn't Turchavat. He was surrounded by opulence. He had a purpose for it. But, or Ramananda Roy, in his involvement with the Devi Dasis, etc. It wasn't Turchavat, but it was beyond. So when Krishna is at the center, then it doesn't mean the aristocracy and the wealth and things of this world must be given up in order to be a qualified Vaishnava. Prabhupada taught us the principle of being able to be in contact with, but not enamored by, material opulence. And it's the lifestyle that he led, and he showed us purposefully. I'll tell one story that had a profound, it still has a profound effect. One morning walk in Vrindavan, during Prabhupada's time, didn't look like what it looked like today. It was agricultural fields in all directions. No shops, no rickshaws, no vehicles. There was a road, but it was desolate, because that's what it was at the time. So out the front gate, turn right, go down the road. Way down on the right, there was a grove of trees. Prabhupada pointed it with his cane. What's that? It's a grove of trees, Prabhupada. Let's go. So we went inside, and in that one particular morning, he was in a mood of teaching us about renunciation. And he gave some examples. He pointed with his cane to a tree. What are these pods hanging from the tree? And he pulled on one and asked, is this edible? And, the living in Vrindavan is very wonderful. The necessities of life can be supplied just by nature. And then we walked further, and there was kind of like a cliff or a sharp decline in the topography of the land. And he pointed with his cane, see over there? There's a householder's home. And they most likely have a cow. And if you go there in the morning with a cup, they'll gladly give you some milk. And your economic condition is finished for the day. And then the rest you can engage in hearing and chanting and serving Krishna. Vrindavan is such a wonderful place. He was going on like that. And then two things happened. One was Yasoda Nandana, then Maharaj, was barefoot, and he stepped on a thorn and started hopping around because he was pulling the thorn out of his foot. And Prabhupada turned around and said, why are your shoes? And he said, I wanted to come to catch the morning walk. He said, you should come with your shoes. So you're not so detached that you're going to harm your body. And then I took it as deliberate. Right in the middle of that conversation, he turned to Brahmananda and said, did you receive the $50,000? Did you put it in this account? Did it go to the book publication? Did you see to the color separations? You did this whiplash right in the middle of this, how Vrindavan life is so simple. And then he switched over there, and then switched back. He could move freely between involvement in the world and a life of total detachment. Total detachment. And that's how it was possible. So for us living in America, or you living as you're living, it's not a matter of location, it's a matter of heart and what you're really attached to. And so as you take on household life and things that go with household life, make sure that Krishna is at the center, and it's not just in name only. Because if it's in name only, then there's entanglement. And if it's Krishna is really at the center, then it's detachment. It's yukta vairagya, according to one's nature. Anasaktasya vishayan. You know the verse? That's how it's done. It's real. It's real. Otherwise, how is it possible to spread Krishna consciousness in a place that's unwholesome? There are devotees, not only Ambarish Prabhu, he's a wonderful example of having so much wealth, and he's using his wealth for Krishna, etc., without details. But that's his heart. He's attached to Prabhupada. That's how. That's the doorway. And then comes the rest. Lord Chaitanya had Lord Nityananda become a householder. He had 2 wives. And he had children. And he was an avaduta. Okay, some Mataji over here.
Thank you, Maharaj. Maharaj, I just wanted to clarify, when Jiva Goswami heard the news of his father's death, after that, did he go directly, after that he went to Navdvip Parikrama, and
Yes.
that's where he was received by
Yes.
Nityanand Prabhu?
Yes.
And Nityanand Prabhu instructed him and told him to go to Vrindavan.
Yes.
Thank you.
I mean, he was expecting, yes, go to Lord Chaitanya, because he was still there. And not there for too long. But he told him to go to Vrindavan. And so he did. I mean, he and Madhusudana, Vachaspati, and then Vrindavan. But because it's part of a mission, Lord Chaitanya's mission. He didn't require that. Require that. He got what he got in some other way. He got the mercy of Lord Chaitanya through Rupa and Sanatan.
So he didn't meet Chaitanya Mahaprabhu.
Again, there are biographers that said when he was a little baby, when Lord Chaitanya went to Ramakeli, he was born, he was a little baby. But that's not confirmed. And, responsible authors will say it's not certain. Some say. But, a little baby, but some say he was placed at the feet of Lord Chaitanya, and I'm kind of belittling that because consistently it's not confirmed. So it makes a nice story, but it's not confirmed. So we don't tell nice stories unless they can be confirmed.
But Nityanand Prabhu instructed Jiva
Yes,
Goswami.
he had Lord Nityananda's association like anything, and he was very affectionate upon him.
Thank you, Maharaj.
We have one more question up front, and I think we'll call it an evening. Oh, we have some online, excuse me.
Maharaj, reflecting on your question, just wanted to share my heart regarding reading Srimad Bhagavatam. After I read Bhagavatam Chaitanya Charitamrita, then my mind started telling me there is Bhakti Ratnaka, there is Chaitanya
Speak
Bhagavat.
more clearly, please.
Okay, there is after reading once Maharaj, Prabhupada books, then my mind started telling me there is Chaitanya Bhagavat, Brihad Bhagavatamrita, and there are many books, and there is something within me that says, okay, let's see what they have written, let's hear more about Lord Chaitanya, pastimes. And that what blocked me to go again back to Srimad Bhagavatam, read it again and again and again. How, please recommend Maharaj.
Well, you're asking the same question a different way than you asked yesterday. Bhagavatam is meant to be heard again and again. It's meant to be heard in the association of others and discussed in the association of others. That's ideal. It can't always happen that way, but that's ideal. Because the topics, the nectar of the topics, come by hearing again and again and discussing in the association of like-minded persons. It's meant like that. Kathayantas chamam nityam, tushanti cha ramanti cha. You know, Lord Chaitanya heard from Gadadhar Pandit, Dhruva and Prahlad Maharaj stories again and again, hundreds of times. So, if there isn't relish in hearing those pastimes again and again, then something inside needs to be realigned. It doesn't mean, therefore, don't go on, but it means there's something inside that needs to be realigned. You know, what's the purpose of this reading? It's not information. It's making the connection. These topics are surcharged with potency to make that connection. They do that. I mean, look at the list of books that each of our acharyas written, and how many of them are centered on Srimad Bhagavatam. It's their life. It's their life. So make it your life. And how do you make it your life? Well, I read it. What's next? There's something missing. Something, alignment that's not set right inside. It doesn't, so once again, it doesn't mean don't read other things until that's set right. But you start reading other things and you'll get the same response to those other things because something's not set right inside.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Online. Let's go online. It's 8:15.
Question from Lavesh Raval Prabhu. Sri Jiva had someone to admonish him. If we are in the situation where we have no such guidance,
Which kind of guidance?
If we have no such guidance.
No such guidance.
Should I find and long for that relationship or focus on something else?
Well, not focus on something else, but it's more than important. It's most valuable to have sadhusanga. And sadhusanga where you are open to receiving some correction. And no, not just somebody that's got a stick in their hand, but somebody that's you trust and they're trustworthy. And when they see you heading in a direction that's in the risk category or in the danger category, they'll speak it. Or the improvement category, they'll speak it. And having such association is very valuable. So it's good to seek it. And you don't have to hurry up and do something, but as you move along, if that's a desire that you're carrying, Krishna will reciprocate and facilitate. Be thoughtful in who those relationships are that you're receiving proper guidance. Next.
Question from Snehavalli Mataji. How can we understand Jiva Goswami not glorifying Ganga with Mahaprabhu's early pastimes in Ganga to Akbar, even though he was a devotee of Mahaprabhu?
Oh, that's easy. Even Mahaprabhu loved the Jamuna, so he wasn't in conflict with Mahaprabhu's mood. He was honoring it, very similar to what Bhaktisiddhanta did when he was called upon to settle dispute. He honored the Brahmanas like anything, and the Brahmanas thought, "Wow, this guy's good. He knows how to honor Brahmanas." And then, after honoring Brahmanas, he indicated the superlative position of Vaishnavas. So that's what Jiva Goswami did, and it's not in contradiction to Lord Chaitanya's mood of loving Vrindavan.
Question from Manikandan Sundararajan. How do we pray for the 6 Goswamis' mercy?
How to? Well, come around Monday evening. We'll be discussing Sad Goswami Astakam. And that's a beginning point. And, hearing about their lives. And this book, you can hear about their lives from the sources just mentioned. And then, most importantly, what service can you do to assist them in the mission that they're giving Lord Chaitanya's mercy? How can you be of service to them as they're trying to give the mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu? Now, one very, very simple way is distribute Prabhupada's books. And discuss Prabhupada's books in the association of devotees. And encourage people to read Prabhupada's books. And encourage people to apply Prabhupada's books. That's some service you can do. And if you're attentive, you'll see the 6 Goswamis popping up here and there again and again. Because the teachings of our disciplic succession are resting on their teachings, which are resting upon Lord Chaitanya's teachings, which are the same as Srimad Bhagavatam. Next.
Question from Soumya Mataji. Does the Pearl Garden or place still exist in Vrindavan?
Yes. It's very near, this is the Malyahari Kund topic, yes? The Pearl pastime? Malyahari Kund is very near to Radha Kund. And you saw a photograph of what it looked like maybe 20 years ago. Maybe it looks, better or worse, I don't know, today. But that's what it looked like. It looks quite simple. What it looked like when the gopis were assembled there likely looked much different. But the transcendentalness of the place is still there, whatever passage of time occurs. Next.
Question from Nikhil Prabhu. Is it correct that if we carefully study Srila Prabhupada's books, we will be able to understand the message of the 6 Goswamis?
Yes. And in Prabhupada's books, he explicitly encourages that the thoughtful reader should study carefully the Sandarbhas of Jiva Goswami. So if you carefully read Prabhupada's books, you'll find that, etc. Next.
Question from Amara Devidasi. The question is in follow-up of the discussion on detachment. The question is, sometimes the circumstances are so illusory that there is no clarity in consciousness. So at such times, how can I understand if I'm attached or being practical?
Or being?
Practical.
Well, a standard answer I like to give in something like this is start with the assumption that there's a mix. There's something and there's something. And there's a mix. So start with that assumption. And then, the fulcrum is going to move a little bit depending upon time and circumstance. And sometimes it'll move more this way, sometimes it'll move more that way. And the litmus test is your desire to be in service to Krishna where Krishna is pleased. To the degree that that's there, it's in the wholesome side. To the degree that it's not there, it's in the toxic side or the conditioned side.
Question from Divya Tirtha Prabhu. When we are in devotee association, they glorify us, but we know in our heart how far we are. What do we do so that we get correction from them so that we can grow in bhakti?
Well, it's not that you need correction from everybody. You need correction from the right source. And you should be tuned into the right source. The right source says. Now, it doesn't mean you can't get correction from anywhere. You can get correction from those who are subordinates. You can get correction from those who are peers. But especially important is correction, a willingness to be corrected. That is, acknowledgement of, by self-evaluation, where we are. And if there's that humility, then it makes it easier to get correction from wherever it comes. Next.
Question from Harshini Mataji. While chanting, what shall we meditate on about six Goswamis?
While chanting, meditate on the holy name. That's what you should meditate on. And meditate on how that's what they did. Let me take inspiration from their chanting of the holy name. They were just absorbed in chanting. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.